Pursuant to Section 3A of House Resolution 491, I hereby give notice of intention that the House consider the following joint resolutions on Wednesday, July 17th at 2019. Senate Joint Resolution 36, Senate Joint Resolution 37, and Senate Joint Resolution 38.
The notice will appear in the record.
Please take your conversations off the floor. Members, we have some business to take care of, so would you please take your conversations off the floor? Please take your conversations off the floor. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 491, I call up the resolution H.Res 489 and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Resolution 489, resolution condemning President Trump's racist comments directed at members of Congress.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from, pursuant to House Resolution 491. The resolution is considered read. The resolution shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, and the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, each will control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous material on H.Res 489.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself 3 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, the comments described in this resolution were not just offensive to our colleagues. They were inconsistent with the principles and values upon which this nation was founded. In urging 4 female members of Congress of color to, quote, go back where they came from, these comments were not only factually incorrect, but they were also deeply hurtful and divisive. These were shocking comments, even from an administration that rips children from the arms of their parents and warehouses asylum seekers in facilities under inhumane conditions. We cannot let this moment pass without a forceful condemnation. Need I remind the Speaker that this is the same president who defended the, quote, very fine people at the neo-Nazi march on Charlottesville, who denounced the, quote, S-hole countries in Africa and the Caribbean, who claimed that Haitian immigrants, quote, all have AIDS, and who declared that a Mexican-American judge who was born in the United States had a, quote, inherent conflict of interest against him. At every turn, Democrats have denounced offensive comments that emanate from the White House, but the silence coming from the other side of the aisle has been deafening. I hope that will finally change today. This Congress must speak loudly and with one voice to condemn the President's words, and more importantly, to condemn the sentiments behind them. The United States should be a beacon of hope and a refuge to those who need its protection, and it should welcome with open arms those who embody our values and ideals. From our earliest days as a nation, we have welcomed people fleeing persecution and violence, and those who seek economic opportunity and freedom in a land whose diversity is one of its greatest strengths. But the President has instead pursued a relentless campaign to build both a literal and a figurative wall around this nation. We must not turn our backs on our historic commitment to immigration and to refuge, and we must not fall prey to racial stereotypes and native fear-mongering that think that some immigrants who came here years ago are okay, but those who come here today, because they're from so-called S-hole countries, are not okay. It was Martin Luther King who told us that, quote, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character," close quote. The offensive words by the President undermine that dream. They contradict that dream. I hope that all of my colleagues will join me in denouncing racism and in supporting this resolution. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is the third time that I've stood in this year on this floor about this subject. And I've been clear at every juncture. Racism, bigotry, and anti-Semitism will find no refuge in the people's house. We expect each other to speak fairly, truthfully, respectfully of all of our fellow members of Congress and of the President. Not because we agree with each other all the time, but because we have great respect for the Americans who elected us and to represent them from one end of Pennsylvania Avenue to the other. I come here today, Mr. Speaker, with much grief and many questions. The first may be procedural, but it is not trivial. The Democrats wrote a resolution last night. It is on the floor today. I just have a question. What happened to the 72-hour rule, ensuring members have an opportunity to review legislation, seek feedback from constituents before voting on it? What happened to regular order? This never came through committee. Why does the House have rules if the Democratic majority only follows them when politically convenient? And also, that was brought up in the rules debate, that there was even no consultation with even others who would want to be a part of this. The President has every right to be frustrated with Congress for the work that we have failed to do on multiple fronts, including the border. I also understand that his recent tweets make it hard for us to move forward. Attacks are like quicksand. They trap and they defeat us before we know it. They're distracting us from legislating, and that was true when the lawmaker implied last week that a member of the House leadership was singled out newly elected women of color, and when other representatives were accused of enabling a racist system. It is true as we see little to no concern from my colleagues across the aisle when a foreign flag is raised over an American facility or a terrorist firebombed another facility. It is true when the President of the United States, out of frustration, tweeted this weekend, and it is true of many comments coming from lawmakers today. In fact, it is interesting for my chairman to say that they have called out the President every time, but also many times, and this is just a small listing of every week, that they've not called out their own members for things that I cannot read on this floor. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, we are too quick, this Congress, to allow political ends to justify procedural means. But that is not democracy rooted in our unalienable rights. Rights the second clause in this resolution affirms. The resolution is simply a lesson in political expediency. Integrity is a prerequisite to our covenant to govern by the consent of the people, which this resolution also affirms. We knew when we voted for the House rules of this January, we could not, in this chamber, use certain language about other democratically elected leaders. We agreed to let ideas compete for our votes and use rhetoric as a tool to build bridges instead of as a kindling to burn those bridges down. Yet not a week goes by, as we've already pointed out, without members of this body issuing statements or tweets that I could not and will not read from this floor without violating our rules. And it is amazing but not surprising some of my colleagues are using this platform to call for impeachment, since many have been making that call since November of 2016. No justification then, and definitely not now. You see, Mr. Speaker, pleas for decorum aren't merely a refuge for lawmakers who find themselves in the minority. Decorum is a symptom of a healthy and confident democracy. When we can debate ideas on this floor, decorum ensures democracy's every voice can be heard. I would like to lend my voices to the chorus of lawmakers supporting the first 15 clauses of this resolution, but for the misguided title and the fourth page of this resolution, we could have had a suspension vote. To its credit, the resolution states the House of Representatives is committed to keeping America open to those lawfully seeking refuge and asylum. I agree. Everyone who votes for this resolution will now be on record as opposing illegal immigration, and I hope we can all work together to address the border crisis based on that common foundation. But again, you don't need a vote on this resolution to do that. You simply have to look at the border and acknowledge the crisis. But we will still have a problem with this resolution. We cannot, and by our own House rules, support a resolution that labels the president in this way, and I will not. The rules that have governed this body since the first United States Congress do not allow us to devolve in that way. However, it doesn't mean that we can't condemn racial or ethnic prejudice. It doesn't mean that we can't decisively reject anti-Semitism, as we have on this floor. But in my view, we've not done it so far in this Congress to that extent. We have failed and have both times on the clarion call of that process failed. I know some colleagues on both sides of the aisle would join each other in that conviction. Our own standards of decorum, however, in fact, empower us to welcome to America every person who respects our laws and wants our help and defend our freedom. These standards also give us a platform to admit when we and those around us make mistakes. When we consider the power of this chamber to legislate for the common good, I wonder why my colleagues have become so eager to attack the president, they are willing to sacrifice the rules, precedent, and the integrity of the people's house for an unprecedented vote that undercuts its very democratic processes. I wonder if the comments in view today are what some of my colleagues say they are, why this resolution, they had to rephrase the resolution to make this point. The resolution condemns comments in a way that exposes the breathtaking partisanship of today's exercise. The resolution quotes only 3 words from the comment it rejects: the words "go back" and "invaders." Beyond those 3 words, the resolution substitutes its own phrasing and editorializing for the words this resolution has in view. Again, partisan show. That's why the tale of today's resolution is more of a political jab than anything else. It is therefore a signal for us to take a moment to look inward. I wonder if, when we are tempted to accuse our sister, our brother, our fellow American political foe, or even this Madam Speaker of racism. By the way, I do not believe the President is a racist. I do not believe the Speaker of this House is a racist. I do not believe the majority leader is a racist. I do not believe the minority leader is a racist. We can go down this line. I do not believe that. And while we insist on using this floor to litigate the propriety of statements made outside these walls, we assign a lot of wicked intent to a lot of tweets, even though 280 characters offers us at least the least context for making our points and endless potential for misunderstanding each other. To be fair, a lot of political speech today seems to be made to deepen our divide by highlighting our differences. And that is a cause for sadness. That is exactly why the rules of decorum in this body are designed to guard against. We have a choice this afternoon, Mr. Speaker. We can pursue escalation against our fellow Americans, or we can pursue reconciliation on their behalf. Only one of those options make room for this body to do its job, the legislating of solutions for the challenges of the American people. Many of the members in this chamber are my friends, and I'm thankful for the chance to work alongside each of them every day. But today, we renew our commitment to democratic ideals of this chamber by voting against a flawed resolution, against a political statement, against something that could not even be written in a proper way without adding editorial and paraphrased comments. I would ask each of my friends on both sides of the aisle to evaluate what is before them, evaluate what we have done, and evaluate what we don't take up for political convenience when it's our side saying it. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished Majority Leader of the House.
Majority Leader is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding. I want to thank the gentleman from Georgia, who is my friend. And I want to respectfully say to him, this resolution is not about partisanship. It's about prejudice. And the necessity to confront it. Mr. Speaker, my father was from Denmark. He was born and raised in Copenhagen and came here as an adult in his 20s. I have a large extended family in Denmark. The President of the United States, Mr. Speaker, did not tell me to go back to Denmark. He did not tell the Speaker of this House, a woman proud of her Italian-American heritage, to go back to Italy. He did not tell the Irish-American members of this body to go back to Ireland, or tell those of German ancestry to go back to Germany. No, he told 4 women of color, 3 of whom are natural-born citizens, born and raised in their home country of America, to go back to their countries. This is their country, Mr. Speaker, I would tell the President. And it is the country of our colleagues who came here as a refugee from Somalia. She endured hardships and arrived on our shores like so many others, seeking freedom, safety, and opportunity. She is an American citizen, one who chose to give back to her community and our country through public service. This is her country. I will not speculate on this floor about the motives or intentions of the President. But no one can dispute that the words he said and wrote were racist words and have been called such by Republicans, with a long history of being used to demean, dismiss, and denigrate some American citizens as less than others, as not fully belonging in our country because of the color of their skin or the origin of their families. Mr. Speaker, to oppose this resolution is in effect saying the words were acceptable. They were not acceptable. Such words should never be acceptable from the leader of this country or, frankly, anybody else. They demean our Declaration of Independence. They demean our Constitution. And they demean our Pledge of Allegiance. One nation, indivisible. So I urge this House to come together and support this resolution. No matter whether one supports this president or not, whether one believes he is a racist or not, vote for this resolution that condemns the words he spoke. They hurt. They are not American. They are not us. The sentiment was not one we ought to espouse. And I say to the President, Mr. Speaker, if I were speaking to him, the next time you wish to denigrate and demean those who came here, or the children and grandchildren of immigrants, say it to me. Say it to all of us in this House. Say it to every descendant of immigrants. Express the sentiment of the House of Representatives that this is not the conversation that we have in America. We lift our lamp beside the golden door. Let us keep that flame bright. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Before we go any further, let me just remind members to refrain from engaging in personality-based remarks toward the President. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have, unfortunately, entered a period of our history when our political rhetoric has become hyperbolic, just as our political views are becoming increasingly irreconcilable. We would all be well advised not to continue down this road. America, love it or leave it, is not a new sentiment nor a radical sentiment, and it certainly is not a racist sentiment. It should remind us of commonly held and enduring founding principles that ought to be uniting us as a free people. Respect for the rule of law and for the uniquely American principles of individual liberty, constitutionally limited government, and personal responsibility that have produced the happiest, most productive, and most powerful nation in the history of the world. Every nation has a right to protect its culture, traditions, institutions, and principles. This fundamental consensus is what binds us together and unites us as a free people. And it's what makes possible all of the compromises and accommodations required by democratic self-government. We have entered an era when that consensus is breaking down. We have seen a growing hostility to our American founders, our American founding principles, and our proud American heritage. Legal immigration, immigrants who come to our country by obeying our laws, respecting our nation's sovereignty, and bringing with them a sincere desire to embrace our Constitution and the principles of liberty that animate and inform our form of government, is integral to this process. Some of the most patriotic Americans I know are legal immigrants who obeyed our laws, who waited patiently in line, who did everything our country asked of them. Some of the most unpatriotic Americans I know were born here and have enjoyed all the blessings of liberty without ever appreciating or even understanding the principles that produced our nation's greatness and its goodness. Socialism and slavery spring from the same principle. In Lincoln's words, the same spirit that says, "You work and toil and make bread, and I will eat it." He reminded us that a house divided against itself cannot stand. He said, "I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect that it must cease to be divided. It must become all one thing or all the other." He understood that freedom and slavery were antithetical, and though they might be held together in a temporary accommodation, they could not coexist for long. Today we face the same conflict between freedom and socialism, and it is time to choose. Now, I wish the President were more temperate in the words he sometimes uses, and I agree that the tone of his recent remarks was unnecessarily provocative. But his central point is irrefutable. There is no requirement for those who hate our country to remain here, when there are so many other countries with different principles and values to choose from, and that have in turn produced very different results. This is as true of those born here as those who have come here from abroad. This President spoke not of race, but of patriotism, American patriotism. And to call that racist fundamentally misunderstands and misrepresents the question before our country today. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Georgia reserves. The gentleman from New York is now recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, the sponsor of the resolution, Mr. Malinowski.
The gentleman is recognized. The gentleman is recognized for 3.5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, when I saw the President's comments over the weekend, my first thought was my politics may not always be the same as the congresswomen he was attacking, but all of us are Americans, and unlike most of them, I was actually born in a foreign country. I took the oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States when I was 10 years old with my mom, when I was sworn in to be a citizen, 5 years after we came here from Poland. Does the President think I should go back because I'm an immigrant who disagrees with his policies? There are 44 million of us American citizens who were born somewhere else, and we new Americans know what it means to be American because we chose America. We know the alternative. Many of us do come from broken countries, communist country in my case, broken by communism, and in many cases broken by leaders who did just what we are condemning today, using race and religion to divide people. The President may be doing it cynically. He wants the drama. He wants the reality show. In my district, we have to deal with the reality that these words are dangerous. Every synagogue in my district either has armed security or is struggling with the question of whether to have it. Every mosque has state police coming to Friday prayers. We know that the words the President uses to drive up his ratings can be like sparks to the gasoline of disturbed minds in our country. That the man who massacred Jews in Pittsburgh was obsessed with migrant caravans and blamed Jews for helping refugees. That the man who murdered Muslims in Christchurch, New Zealand, believed immigrants are invaders who should go back to their countries. These fringe haters have always been with us. Never before have their twisted thoughts been legitimized by the highest leaders in our land. Yesterday, after the President's tweets, the neo-Nazi Daily Stormer website gloated that this is the kind of white nationalism we voted for. Now we have to decide, is this the kind of politics that we want in our country? Mr. Speaker, this resolution is not really about the President. We know who he is. My Republican colleagues know who he is. The question is, the only question left to us is, who are we? Because this is not about him, this is about us. Are we still the country of immigrants and of laws that every great American leader, from Ben Franklin to FDR to John F. Kennedy to George Bush, believed in? Do we still believe what Ronald Reagan said, that Americans lead the world because unique among nations we draw our people, our strength from every country and every corner of the world? That new Americans renew our pride and gratitude in the United States of America, the greatest, freest nation in the world? This is the choice that every member of the House will have to make tonight. Do we agree with President Reagan's hopeful, confident, patriotic vision of America, or with President Trump's message of fear? Mr. Speaker, Republicans and Democrats can afford to disagree about many things in this House, but let us not be divided on decency to our fellow Americans. At this defining moment for our country and for this body, let us come together to support this resolution. Thank you, and I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Gonzalez.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you. I was one of the first Republicans, I believe, to speak out once the comments came public on Sunday. I did it Sunday afternoon, and then I did it again on Monday. But I cannot, in good faith, support this resolution because I can't possibly overlook the partisan nature in which it was brought forward and the number of issues that we have control over in the House that we're choosing to ignore and have continued to ignore since we were sworn in January. We have members of this body who have called detention facilities concentration camps, have supported people who are labeling our Border Patrol agents and our ICE officers as Nazis. The gentleman just mentioned some folks outside of this body of Congress who he believes, have been inspired by certain comments. Well, where is the condemnation of these? When are we going to stand up and condemn those who call Americans who are doing their jobs, by the way, enforcing laws that we enact, Nazis? When are we going to push back on that? When are we going to push back on comments, and I quote, after one of our members was criticized? He said, after the comments, I got a text message from a friend who's like, hey, next time, really clarify. Maybe talk like a fourth grader because maybe the racist idiots will understand you better. Am I a racist idiot? Do I read at a fourth grade level? Do the members of this body? Have we gotten so broken as a Congress where a simple disagreement results in us labeling one another racist idiots? Is that who we are? Where's the condemnation? When are we going to speak out about that? And I don't have to remind this body about the last time we were here for a similar process, when one of our members said it's all about the Benjamins, implying that members of both sides of the aisle are being purchased and bought by our Jewish brothers and sisters. When are we going to stand up and speak out against that? Because I've been here for 7 months now, and it's the same thing over and over again. And the people who lose, and we all know this, are the constituents who are relying on us to actually work to solve problems. We've done nothing to support USMCA, to bring it up for a vote. We've done nothing to bring down the cost of prescription drugs. We haven't done anything since we've been here. And the reason is because we've been focused on fighting each other online, biting back and forth, rushing in front of the cameras, boosting our Twitter followers, and inciting the very division that prevents us from seeking common ground. I, like I know most of my colleagues, came here to find common ground. We came here to fight for the ideals that make our nation great. I am the son of Cuban immigrants, proudly. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nuttner.
Thank you. I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Tlaib.
The gentlelady from Michigan is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of this resolution because I want every single person in my district to know that not only are they part of the squad, but we are all here to stay. I want them to know that they belong, that we see and hear them loud and clear. I am more proud today, Mr. Speaker, than ever to be the daughter of Palestinian immigrants, to be the first in my family to graduate high school and later college, to have grown up in the city that birthed movements that fought and won against racism and inequality in our country. It is a city that taught me to never back down, to speak up when I see injustice, and one that elected the first of 2 Muslim women serving in the United States Congress. This resolution chooses all of us. It chooses you. It chooses those who are marginalized, and more importantly, it chooses the values that we all must live up to. We cannot allow anyone, especially the President of the United States, to erode our core American values. I urge my colleagues to please choose our country, choose the American people, and to support this resolution. Thank you.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins.
Thank you. At this time, I yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Tyler.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in opposition to House Resolution 489, the latest legislative attack on the President. Much like most of the ideas and comments coming from the leading members of the socialist left, yesterday's press conference was at best political theater. In the last few days, Democrat members of this House have attacked the President with claims of racism. Some have even said, and then walked back, similar comments referring to the Democrat House Speaker. None of those accusations are based in fact. As the representative of the people of the 9th Congressional District of Pennsylvania, I feel it is most important to address this matter and then move on to engage in the work and what matters of real substance and importance to the people of our country, rather than baseless name-calling and offensive lectures. The ongoing policy debate across the country will continue to be socialism versus American exceptionalism. The people will decide our direction. What has really happened here is that the President and his supporters have been forced to endure months of allegations of racism and concentration camp accusations. I yield back.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from...
More seconds. I'll give the gentleman 30 more seconds.
The gentleman has an additional 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Collins. This slander, this ridiculous slander, does a disservice to our nation and the American people, and I, like many, am tired of it. I urge a no vote on the resolution aimed purely at harassing the President of the United States, and I yield back.
Reserve. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
The gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Lee, is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman. I said earlier today that I wish we were not here, but we are here, and now I wish to indicate that I am appalled at any commentary that demeans or hurts a fellow human being or a fellow American or a fellow world citizen. And so the recounting of various statements, I realize and recognize that comments were made about statements to ease the pain of those who are receiving it. Right now, we're talking about comments that came from the highest office in the land, which really does reflect what this little book, the Constitution, says, that this nation was organized to create a more perfect union. But yet, unfortunately, the officer in the White House, the President of the United States, took to tweeting and talked about the first African-American woman from the 7th District, talked about the first Palestinian-American woman, the youngest woman elected to Congress, and the first Somali-American woman of color. And so it is imperative that today, along with H.Res 494, my resolution, that we condemn this action and we do it together. I ask my Republican colleagues to vote for the underlying resolution. I yield back.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from West Virginia, Ms. Miller.
The gentlewoman from West Virginia is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak in opposition to the resolution on the floor. For the past 7 months, the President has stated that there is a crisis on our border. Republican House leadership has said there is a crisis on the border. My colleagues have said there is a crisis on the border. And I have said there is a crisis on the border. Throughout this, the Washington Democrats have denied it again and again. From the party leadership and the committee chairs, in hearings, and even on the House floor, many have said that the crisis is fake, phony, non-existent, manufactured, imaginary, and false. They turned a blind eye to a crisis because of a political opposition, and the media followed suit. A few weeks ago, several of my colleagues across the aisle took a trip to our southern border, bringing cameras and journalists along with them. They finally came to terms with what the Republicans have been saying for months. However, instead of focusing on the root of the problem, underfunding and overcrowding, backlog cases, and unprecedented surges, they opposed funding and passed a bill to ban construction on the southern border. For 7 months, my colleagues across the aisle have denied a crisis and failed to act. They still haven't acted. I want to work together to solve this crisis. Instead, we are here debating political nonsense. I've had enough talk about tweets, squads, infighting, labels, and petty disagreements. When we look at the content of the legislation brought up for discussion today, it is no surprise that the American people have such a low approval of Congress. It is not a messaging bill to placate the activists. It's an advancement of the socialist agenda, a bill to handcuff our president or a denouncement of the American values. I came to Congress to create jobs, grow the economy, innovate our energy industry, and fix West Virginia's infrastructure. I was sent here to move our country forward and to solve the problems that actually affect the lives of those we represent, to improve our communities, our country. That is why we're all here. This resolution is a waste of time. I urge my colleagues to oppose this legislation and any legislation that doesn't deliver the results for our country that our citizens deserve. I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is now recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen.
The gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen, is recognized. 1 minute.
Thank you. I join in supporting this resolution. I felt that we should have had a stronger resolution that censored the president, H.Res. 490, because the conduct of which has been charged is beneath the office of the president. He should not disparage people and suggest they go back to where they were born. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez was born in the Bronx, and her parents were born in Puerto Rico. Mr. Trump should know Puerto Rico is the United States of America. From references to Haiti and African countries as whole countries, to their fine people on both sides in Charlottesville with neo-Nazis and Klansmen there, he's gone out of his way to find opportunities to besmirch Hispanic Americans, people of Mexican descent, and African Americans and African countries. This is wrong and beneath the office of the president. I yield back the balance of my time.
Let me remind members again to refrain from engaging in personality-based remarks toward the president or any other member. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for a time check on both sides, please.
The gentleman from Georgia has 12 and a half minutes, quarters.
Gentleman from New York.
The gentleman from New York has 20 minutes.
Thank you. This time I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Duffy.
The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
I appreciate the gentleman for yielding, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to note at the start of this resolution, for the first 3 pages, I agree with everything. We have great quotes in here of our founders and American presidents who talk about the strength of this country that has come from immigrants and immigration, and I wholeheartedly concur. As we get to page 4, though, I have significant disagreement. I would note that on page 4, on the whereas, it's noted that Trump's racist comments have legitimized fear and hatred of new Americans. And I just want to make a point to my friends across the aisle, because in paragraph 2, you note that it's committed to keeping America open to those who lawfully seek refuge and asylum from violence and oppression. Lawfully seek refuge and asylum. But I would note that just recently President Trump has said those who have sought asylum, had a hearing, and have a deportation order, you are all offended by that. You didn't include in your resolution those who had deportation orders issued, your opposition to them being removed. So you actually agree with us and President Trump that those who have lawful orders of deportation should be sent out of the country, just to cite your resolution. But I want to note, Mr. Speaker, that I've looked closely at the chain of 3 tweets sent out by President Trump. And in those tweets, I see nothing that references anybody's race. Not a thing. I don't see anyone's name being referenced in the tweets. But the president's referring to people, congresswomen, who are anti-American. And lo and behold, everybody in this chamber knows who he's talking about. Who are the anti-American members of Congress? He didn't say their names. He did not say their race, but he commented on what they view, how they view America. And we all know who he's talking about. I want immigrants to come to this country. But if you come to this country, shouldn't you love this country? We all come here and see imperfection. And we work every week trying to make our country better. But to say I wholeheartedly dislike the country, the fact that I'm going to call the president an MFer, good Lord, what has the institution become? And then to come to this floor and chastise the president for a couple of tweets when that's the language you use against him, that is rich, Mr. Speaker, that's the language that the left would use, and then try to call out the president who didn't cite a race or he didn't cite a name. I look at this, and I think we are all called to do better and be better. We should make this country better. But when I look at some who say, I believe that socialism is a purer form of government and a better economic economy over capitalism that has given us the freest, most generous, most prosperous country that's ever existed on the face of the earth, that we want to trade this in for a system that has always failed, I think you're going to see Republicans push back against that, and I think many Democrats will push back against that. And I think that's what this argument really comes down to. And I'm going to one other note. I look at some of my conservative colleagues, whether it's Candace Owen, Diamond and Silk, Justice Thomas, who are...
The gentleman, please.
I yield back.
The gentleman from New York is recognized, Mr. Nadler. Before you go, let me again say, please direct your comments to the chair.
Mr. Speaker, I have a parliamentary inquiry.
Woman will state a parliamentary inquiry.
My inquiry is this. My colleague across the aisle just referred to members of Congress as anti-American. I believe that those words are defamatory, and I would like to ask whether that is appropriate for a request for the gentleman to take down his words.
The chair will not issue an advisory opinion. I have directed both sides to please address the chair, number one, and number two, I've asked that members refrain from engaging in any personality-based remarks. So the chair is not going to issue an advisory at this point.
So a member can say that other members of Congress are anti-American, and there is no resolution for that? We would like to ask the gentleman to take down his words.
Words be taken down.
Is the gentleman making a demand that the words be taken down?
Yes, I am asking that the gentleman's words be taken down.
In order for the words to be taken down, the objection has to be contemporary to the remarks.
I was trying to get the attention. Okay, Mr. Speaker, I will relinquish the point, but I just want to remind my colleagues that that is completely inappropriate to tell any of us that we are anti-American.
Look, let me just say, if the violation occurs again, I will interrupt in sentence. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished Speaker of the House.
The distinguished Speaker of the House is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding. I thank him for his leadership in so many ways in this Congress. Mr. Nadler, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I commend Mr. Malinowski and Mr. Raskin for bringing this important resolution to the floor. And Mr. Speaker, I come to this floor prayerfully. It's really very, very sad. It was interesting to me, and I spoke out about this, that on Sunday in Catholic Masses, and I don't know beyond that, the gospel of the day was the gospel of the Good Samaritan. A person asked Jesus, "What do I have to do to enter the kingdom of heaven?" And Christ replied, "Love thy neighbor as thyself. Show mercy." That very same day, and then went on to talk, and then he said, "Well, how do I do this?" And Jesus gave him the example of the Good Samaritan. Everyone is familiar with how a stranger helped another stranger, a foreigner helped another foreigner, the Good Samaritan. Love thy neighbor as thyself, show mercy. On that very same day, coincidentally, ironically, sadly, whatever adverb you want to use, the president was instituting raids into the homes of families. I went to Spanish Mass this weekend to see, and saw the dignity of those families, the beauty of the children, and the fear that the president had struck in their hearts as we are listening to the gospel of the Good Samaritan, to show mercy and love thy neighbor as thyself. That very same day, unfortunately, there were those who were not informed by that gospel. And so here we are later in that day. It was stunning to hear the words that were used, "Go home," to some of our colleagues. The same words that were used to so many people in our country, whether because they weren't born here or because they didn't look like some others here. Go home. As annoyed and as insulted as we all should be about the president saying that about our colleagues, it's also not showing mercy for him to say that about so many people in our country as he wants to split up families. So I thank Mr. Malinowski and Mr. Raskin for the opportunity to speak to the statements that the president made later in the day of the gospel of the Good Samaritan. Mr. Malinowski was born abroad, Mr. Raskin for his firm leadership in advancing this important resolution. The House, hopefully, has come together, standing as one, to denounce the White House's xenophobic attacks on our members, on our people, and to defend the values of America. And what is America? America is many things: a land of a great constitution which is under threat, a beautiful land that God has given us which is being degraded, values that we share that are being undermined. But America is also a nation largely, but not totally, largely of immigrants. As this resolution so beautifully states, the founders conceived America as a haven for refuge, for people fleeing from religious and political persecution. And Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, having opposite views on other subjects, all emphasized that the nation gained as it attracted new people in search of freedom and livelihood for their families. The resolution quotes our most iconic presidents, who all recognize that immigrants are the constant reinvigoration of America, of hope, determination, optimism, and courage to make the future better. Those are American values. Those are American traits: hope, optimism, courage. And many of these immigrants, when they come here with those values and those traits, make America more American. Franklin Roosevelt said, "Remember always that all of us, and you and I especially, are descendants from immigrants." President John F. Kennedy, who wrote that the contribution of immigrants can be seen in every aspect of our national life. And President Ronald Reagan, who he said it so beautifully in his last speech as President of the United States, which is quoted in this resolution, who said, "If we ever close the door to new Americans, our leadership in the world would soon be lost." Yet the President's comments about our colleagues this weekend showed that he does not share those American values. These comments from the White House are disgraceful and disgusting, and these comments are racist. How shameful to hear him continue to defend those offensive words, words that we have all heard him repeat not only about our members, but about countless others. Our caucus will continue to forcefully respond to those attacks on our members, which reflect a fundamental disrespect for the beautiful diversity of America. There is no place anywhere for the President's words, which are not only divisive, but dangerous, and have legitimized and increased fear and hatred of new Americans and people of color. It's so sad because you would think that there would be a given that we would universally in this body just say, of course, of course. And there's no excuse for any response to those words but a swift and strong, unified condemnation. Every single member of this institution, Democratic and Republican, should join us in condemning the President's racist tweets. To do anything less would be a shocking rejection of our values and a shameful abdication of our oath of office to protect the American people. I urge a unanimous vote and yield back the balance of my
I was just going to give the General Speaker of the House if she would like to rephrase that comment.
I have cleared my remarks with the parliamentarian before I read them.
And take it. And I ask the words be taken down. I make a point of order the gentlewoman's words are unparliamentary and ready to be taken down.
The chair will remind all members, please do not make comments toward personality-based comments. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
I made a point of order that the gentlewoman's unparliamentary and request they be taken down.
Is the gentleman making a demand that the words be taken down?
Go ahead. I request that the gentlewoman's words are unparliamentary and request that they be taken down.
All members will suspend. The clerk will now report the words. House will be in order. The clerk will report the words.
Every single member of this institution, Democratic and Republican, should join us in condemning the president's racist tweets. To do anything less would be a shocking rejection of our values and a shameful abdication of our oath of office.
The chair is ready to make a statement. I came in here to try to do this in a fair way. I kept warning both sides, let's not do this, hoping we could get through. Ms. Japal had a situation where we could be in here on another motion to take down words of a friend of mine, but we don't ever want to pass up, it seems, an opportunity to escalate, and that's what this is. I'll dare anybody to look at any of the footage and see if there was any unfairness. But unfairness is not enough because we want to just fight. I abandon the chair.
I'm going to accept this.
The House will be in order. The chair is prepared to rule. The chair is prepared to rule. The words of the gentlewoman from California contain an accusation of racist behavior on the part of the president, as memorialized in Dashell's Precedents, Chapter 29, Section 65.6, characterizing an action as racist is not in order. The chair relies on the precedent of May 15, 1984, and finds that the words should not be used in debate. What purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
Mr. Speaker, I have a motion at the desk.
Clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Collins of Georgia moves that the words of the gentlewoman from California be stricken from the record.
The question is on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. No. The nays have it.
Speaker, I request the yeas and nays. Mr. Speaker,
The gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are ordered. All those in favor of that, please rise. Obviously, a sufficient number having arisen. The vote will be taken by electronic device. The yeas and nays are ordered. 15-minute vote.